I think the supplier base in the U.S. at this moment is probably struggling more with the duties imposed related to the trade war with China rather than NAFTA, USMCA at this moment. There was a lot of uncertainty, and that there was more on I would say even previous years, trying to define what was going to happen with NAFTA, and whether the new USMCA was going to happen or not, and that was probably the main focus at that time. But at this moment, I think it's more about the trade war, it's more about the duties, it's more about how it affects them, not only in the U.S., but all North America for that matter. I mean, how it affects their U.S. operations and Mexican operations and their operations as they are related in North America.
But I will add it to that, Carlos, that in everything that we have here so far about the auto industry, and how is that going to get affected by the new USMCA regulations, I guess that a lot of the activities that have to be performed, or the tasks that have to be performed at corporate levels to find out how is the supply chain going to get affected, has been distracted because of what Carlos was explaining about this trade war with China, which ultimately has kind of dragged all of the attention of companies to find a solution for that. And I truly believe that the challenge is going to be to understand if companies are going to be facing something else that is going to be outside of USMCA. And what I'm talking about is the regulations that are outside of USMCA, like the specifically talking about steel, specifically talking about those rules that are going to be imposed, regardless of what is going to be written down on the USMCA, that can easily shift or challenge companies to find a different source, relocate a source, which is going to be not that easy because it takes time to develop a new supplier wherever they're going to be. So I think that besides the trade war with China, which actually has changed or get the attraction of everyone, the other changes that might be happening that are not going to be written on the USMCA are the ones that are going to be more challenging for companies, and we are seeing that already with companies outside of the auto industry. And it's going to be related to the aerospace industry, medical industry, every other company that is having a hard time with it.
And specifically on the USMCA, I think some of the companies right now are somehow relaxed on that because not a lot of, there hasn't been a lot of talk about that recently. There's not a lot of conversation. Obviously, that is going through the process of having to be, the new USMCA having to be ratified by the Senate in Mexico and the House of Representatives in the US. That has not happened yet. That has not even really started yet. So that's why I think they're not thinking too much about it right now. I think we're still gonna need time for that to get into review, see what comes out of that review, and whether that review brings in either certainty or uncertainty for these suppliers or for the OEMs and their supplier base, tier 1s, tier 2s, just to better understand what is really gonna happen, and at the end how it's gonna apply.
Okay. Do these changes identify any groups of companies that are more at risk than others, or it's still unknown, it's still uncertain?
Well, we know, everybody knows, of course, that the automobile industry, especially the light vehicles, are going to be target for this. I mean, this is something that has been on the news, this is something that has been everywhere. And it's not just about the raw material, it's actually about the content, it's actually about everything that is going to be related, especially talking about labor and the cost of labor associated to it. In top of that, we have some other industries that maybe they have not figured out the impact that they are going to have, but every other company that is extensive user of steel will be subject to new regulations in terms of content, regional content. So that is going to trigger some additional challenges for those companies. And more importantly is that also aluminum and textiles are going to be some other, companies that are using those are going to be some of the companies that are going to have to do something different in order to find a better way or a solution to the, I will say, excessive tariffs that can be coming out or can be ruled out soon. Well, I have already mentioned steel, aluminum, textiles, but generally speaking, we're talking about those. The issue right now is going to be just North America. I mean, that includes, based on the rules of USMCA, North America is defined as the combination of Canada, US, and Mexico. The issue with that is that if something else comes out, and by something else is a different rule that is not based on the USMCA regulations, that is going to protect specific industries, then an additional task will be that if a company has to buy steel only made in the USA. And for that, the challenges are going to be to go all the way back to track where the steel mill is located, which is not going to be that easy, especially when we're talking about the complexity of the process of steel. To get all the way back to the mill when you're a user of a manufacturing product that has been coming out from a facility probably in Mexico, in the United States, and you need to find all the way back to where the steel is coming from. So it's not going to be easy, and that process is going to be something that is going to be there on both sides. So far has been requested, and both sides, I mean the United States and the Mexican government, which is right now working on something like that.
Also in that regarding, we're talking about supply chain. We do have right now the effect of, or we have going through the effect of, again, the trade war and the tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum, especially textile. I put it a little bit on the side, although it does have an effect as well. But for the majority of the clients that we have, it is more about steel and aluminum, where the implications are. Now, that has brought up also a lot of activity and movement in terms of the companies or OEMs based in North America trying to look at their supplier base and whatever they are, or the part of the supply base that they have in Asia, especially in China, how to try to bring them closer or try to find an alternative so they don't get hit by those duties. So a lot of the activity that we have been seeing in the past year, so that has a lot to do with that. Okay, in some cases implies major changes in the structure of their supply chain for these OEMs. Now, as recent as of, I think it was today, if not yesterday, that there's a potential upcoming meeting of President Trump and President Xi Jinping to try to come to an agreement in terms of the trade war or some of the aspects of the trade war. That could change things. If that meeting is going to happen, if that meeting is going to bring down the duties to where they were before, is that going to be a substantial change? So a lot of the activity that we were seeing related to that is no longer going to happen, or it's going to go in a different direction. We don't know. The only thing, again, is that this is something that is in the works in terms of changes that could happen, and it could trigger different reactions from the market.
And the specific change that is going to be, it has been included already in the documents of the so far proposed USMCA, is that all of the content needs to be in compliance with specific regulations. And some of those regulations, of course, includes the rules of origin. And rules of origin are not going to be that easy to comply with as it used to be in the past, or it's actually how it works today. The restrictions are going to be quite different. And companies, they need to find a way to engage with their suppliers to make sure that they pass the information out, and it has to go all the way downstream and upstream on the supply chain, which is not going to be that easy, because today a lot of companies, they just easily ask for something and they believe in what they get. Right now, if one of your suppliers doesn't have the information which can be considered to be precise, and you use that as a fact, then the issue is going to be for the OEM, for example. So that is something that is going to trigger additional, I will say, work, I will say additional activities in order to be in compliance with the new regulations. So in other words, yes, there is a huge importance to take or be aware of those changes that are going to be taking place, so you can be taking actually some steps ahead of it to understand how the relationship with your supplier is based today, and if it is working according to what the new rules are going to be asking for.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is the word transparency. I would say more clarity rather than transparency, because again, this is not about the suppliers trying to hide information in the supply chain to the OEM, but rather them becoming more aware, more educated, and that everybody's on the same page, on the same line as to what are the new rules and what they should be complying with. So ultimately the OEM is not affected. Anybody for that matter in the supply chain, but there's not a disruption, towards the final product.
Well, let me start by saying the next thing. It has been almost 25 years since NAFTA was signed. Still today, 87% of the imports of raw material is just telling us that it's a really high number. That means that there is not a real supplier base in Mexico, because still today most of the companies are importing goods from outside. Being that said, I guess that the biggest advantage that we have seen are for the automotive industry, which have included a lot of the supplier-based tier 1s and tier 2s to come down to join them on this venture in Mexico. So it's a good example of a specific industry that has been moving on that direction. Of course, how a site should be selected, most of the times we have seen that it is basically cost-driven. Of course, includes the operating cost, logistics cost. But nowadays, I think that the most important part is going to be, to actually build a real engagement and a real relationship with the supplier, because most of the companies will be looking for a long-term relationship, and I don't think that those are going to be there anymore. The market outside is asking to be dynamic, it's asking to be able to change and to adapt, and that doesn't allow companies to give out to the suppliers or existing suppliers a long-term relationship. So what we need to do is we need to work with companies and those suppliers that are going to be key for those companies to actually develop together how the suppliers can be better. And it's just not going to be driven by cost. And of course, the result of that coming out in an additional discount. Companies should be focusing more on developing the relationship with the suppliers, so it can actually be a reliable source, and it can be someone that can be adding to their productivity, and it can be coming back or a way to support the new requirements that we are seeing from the market. So I truly believe that Mexico is still a really good location for companies to go in this direction. As I said, there is a lot of opportunities because of the lack of domestic suppliers. So working together with their existing suppliers when they are from abroad, just find a good way to make it work. It will be something really good. In the past, we have helped a lot of companies to work with their suppliers to find a good way to do it, where it can be a win-win situation. And when you do it in the right way, not just by adding pressure or pushing them to do something, really good things can be coming out of it.
Adding to what Alejandro has said, yes, unfortunately, after many years, still the local supplier base is very low. Okay, a lot of parts and components continue to come from abroad, and then for the companies, as they think of potentially rearranging or relocating their supplier base, they have usually two ways. Okay, one way is to develop local suppliers, Mexican suppliers, if you may, and the other one is to bring in their own suppliers, the ones that they have been working with, and the ones that they know already, and bring them to Mexico. Okay, and we know that unfortunately, developing the local suppliers, the Mexican companies, or try to have the Mexican companies get linked into the supply chain of these larger companies is not that easy, and that has to do mostly with the cost of capital in Mexico, the lack of incentives for these either small, medium-sized companies to really be able to get the right support, the right finance in order to get link and play in that field. Okay, there are some good examples of some companies that have been able to do it, but it is hard. Generally speaking, it's hard. So for the OEMs, let's say, or international companies to rely solely on the local and developing the local supply base, that is not, I would say, in some industries, not fast enough for what they need. So it is easier for that matter to bring in their current suppliers and have them migrate to Mexico. Okay, and I think there's plenty of opportunity there. Now, in terms of the criteria, I think just adding also to what Alejandro has said, the other part of every project is different. So obviously, every project will have to analyze its own business case, and based on that, decide which location could be the best. Okay, but going through that process, something that is going to be very, very important in related to labor availability would be also the mindset of these companies coming to Mexico, and them putting enough attention to generate a good working environment, to become an employer of choice, and really develop a good operation in Mexico. So, to the last question, I mean, is Mexico still a good place, a good location? Certainly yes, and that has to do with, I mean, geographically speaking, that advantage is there. I don't think it's going away. We believe there will continue to be a very strong relationship in terms of North America, and how the U.S. continues to be a major market for the end consumer, and how the two countries, Canada and Mexico, interact with the U.S. in terms of the overall manufacturing capacity, the overall, obviously coming all from the supply chain. And if everything in terms of the uncertainties of the USMCA and the trade war and what have you kind of get settled, that would obviously potentialize the continued growth of the region, and obviously for Mexico as well.
I think that, right now it has always been the key, and it's always going to be part of the strategy and the name of the game. Of course, cost, availability, and of course quality is going to be there always. I guess that the building a supplier base that can be considered strong, it has to be someone that you can call yours or manage your relationship with them as a partner. If you grow, they grow. They can go and you can actually share the pain with them. Most of the times sharing the pain means getting everyone used to the new trends of market, which are changing. I think that right now, if you think about once again, let's go back to the market that we all know in Mexico. You can go and try to get a vehicle now, which if you go back in time, like 20 years ago or something, if you wanted to go to one of the dealers here, you will get a Ford vehicle, and it's just going to be whatever they have is what you were able to buy. Nowadays it's completely different. You can tune up the vehicle actually, or personalize your vehicle before you actually buy it. That requires a supplier base that is completely different to what it used to be 20 years ago. It has to be someone that is flexible, it has to be someone that is capable to meet those new requirements, and of course to be able to change and adapt their manufacturing according to the customer's needs. So it's not going to be that easy if you just base your supplier relationship as it used to be in the past. And I believe that today, and when everybody talks about nearshoring, when everybody speaks about the relocation of some potential suppliers, they still are working based on cost. It is not based on the construction of a new relationship that involves how to use your knowledge, to transfer that knowledge to your suppliers so they can become more productive and they will be more engaged to work with you, because the interest is going to be mixed. But I still believe that I will call it the sourcing team at great corporations or large corporations, is still working a little bit outside, or it has been left outside. They are not being part of the strategy as a whole. They are just trying to keep up with the traditional way to find savings, to find discounts, to find a way to make it happen and to make it work. It has been successful, but I don't think, and I don't believe it's going to keep on working like that. It's going to be different, and I truly believe that they're going to have to change a few things on the way that they work.
For me, I mean, in general, and obviously when you're talking about suppliers and, what are the key for a strong supplier base, and why should I choose my suppliers, or and obviously you can talk about just the typical ones, obviously cost, quality, responsiveness, and what have you. For me, the one that is a key element, thinking about mid and long term, is sustainability. That is what has been affecting a lot of the supply chains right now. As you go down to tier ones, and then especially tier twos and tier threes, so you get to your mid-sized companies, you get to your family-owned businesses, smaller companies. Are those companies in a position to last for the next 5 years, 10 years? So right now you can measure that in terms of what they are delivering today and whether they are performing today. But is that the supplier base that is going to be sustainable again in 5 years and 10 years? So that for me would be key. And some of the companies might have their supply chain working today, but they should be analyzing which parts of their supply chain are no longer going to work a few years down the road, because the company, the owners, nobody has the drive to make the necessary move, the necessary changes, as the industry needs to do a shift or needs to do something different as well in terms of whether it is their manufacturing footprint around the world or whatever case it might be. Okay, so for me, that is the word sustainability would be key in this process.
Right now, every other company is going to feel comfortable the way that they work. It is the easiest way to do is to work first on the transfer of a manufacturing operation without making any disruption on this actual supplier base. Most of the companies, they get stuck a little bit with the knowledge transfer. A lot of the knowledge stays back in the corporate office outside of Mexico. And I'm going to be using Mexico as a good example here because we have seen that so many times. But then when a company finally decides to start developing a new supplier base, they are not the only ones targeting the same supplier. And we have seen that. Sometimes the same company is being requested by two different clients to join them in Mexico. But those two clients, they don't get along, they don't mix efforts, they don't work together, they don't combine their volumes so they can make it efficient for everyone. And I think that is something that is going to have to change. Otherwise, it's like protecting, let's say that I have my own supplier and Carlos has his own supplier. It has to be sometimes the same supplier, and maybe it's not the same one, but one of them is the only one that is going to be lasting later. So what I'm trying to say here is that at some point in time we're going to have to work together in order to make it, to make a good thing, make a good deal for one of those suppliers, and we can join the effort so they can make it actually work for them. And that is something that I have never seen working that well, I will say. And of course it's something that I have to change because it's going to be mandatory to do it.
Collaboration, interesting. Okay. I wanted to say something about certified vendor program, but maybe I'll write it. Do you want to mention how can clients reduce unnecessary costs, or it's not very defined in a good answer?
When you have a supplier that is really good and is providing something that is extremely important, it will have a significant impact on your supply chain. Usually you start working with an alternative source. So you start working with somebody else. You don't want to keep all the eggs in one basket. You don't want to keep one supplier to be the only one. Ultimately, when you start shifting from one supplier to another and you start mixing those, and probably you will go to a third one, and depending on how large your operations will be worldwide, you will end up with different suppliers worldwide. And the issue with that is that it's going to be more adding cost into your process of just keeping pace and keeping control of your supplier in the supplier relationship. And probably it may be a nonsense for a regular sourcing guy, which is not me, but it's you need to have more than one source. You really need to have more than one source. What will happen if you actually help one company to grow that big, to be capable to keep your demand, and actually you, instead of being worried to be, keeping all the demand only for him, and you invite that supplier with your competition. It's a collaboration issue that has to be the other way around. It's not about the supplier trying to meet the two customers. It's the two customers working together with one supplier. It's something that we don't see, that we have never seen. But I truly believe that some of the things that the market is going to be pushing for to change, because those hidden costs that are going to be there on that relationship, on how to build it with the different suppliers and managing those. Just think about the PPAs, forget about control. We can talk about easily just by saying it's not control, it's a collaboration thing.
Okay. When should a client search for new suppliers? And what can they possibly do to reduce unnecessary costs in their supply chains?
It has never been easy to search for new suppliers. We understand that. We understand that it's not easy to change. It is not easy to go through the audit process and everything. But I think that companies in the past, they have shifted from one supplier to another, and more than shifting, they have been adding alternative suppliers because they want to make sure that they have more than one source just in case. And usually that tendency, it's ending up with having multiple suppliers worldwide that you have to audit, that you have to test, and of course that's additional cost for the sourcing team and for the company itself. As a client, you're investing more money just by keeping that all of those suppliers aligned into with your expectations and your requirements. And we don't see that easily changing because it's a tendency that has been there for a lot of time. But I think that if a company decided to go the other way around, which is actually helping a supplier to develop the capacity so they can be the one that is going to be growing with them and is going to build a long-lasting relationship, and instead of being worried that you will have only one source, what will happen if you share that supplier with somebody else that is going to be requesting exactly what you're going to be buying from them, which is the typical thing that you will find in the automotive industry. What is not typical is to join the efforts to develop a supplier. It's more likely to join the efforts or keep your efforts to multiply your suppliers. And that, in terms of cost, is going to work, I guess, in the opposite direction. And as I said before, I guess that the tendency of the market is going to be pushing companies to be more flexible and the flexibility is related to, sometimes it's related to cost. You have to be able to change and adapt your manufacturing process, and of course that requires a lot of investment, that requires a lot of expenses, and you have to be very well set up in order to do something like that and keep the pace of what we're going to be asking. And the only way to do that is to grow your business. And since nobody's going to be giving you a long-term relationship, the only thing is to join the effort with another potential client that your supplier can use.
This collaboration that you speak of, do you think that would be best through certain cameras or clusters, or how do you think we could in North America implement this type of collaboration to make win-win with this new supplier content and the new strategies?
I'll give you a good example.
Yeah.
A good example of that is that every time that a company is looking for to, let me say, develop a local supplier, it will be always easier to ask who else of your competition. I mean, who's using them, who's working with them, who knows them, what is the reliability that they have, what is the relationship that they have with a specific supplier. But since they don't have that communication, they don't have that collaboration, you start by doing it on your own. You start to do it on your own evaluations, and you start testing. And by testing, that means you set a lot of risk. And ultimately, you can be successful, and sometimes you might not be that successful. And what you end up doing is you go back to your original supplier. That, of course, is going to be reducing your productivity because you keep the same supplier base as if you were back in the US, let me say. And then my point here is that collaboration extends to finding a new supplier base, and what you have to do is you have to be part of either an industrial network, you have to be part of a chamber, part of a industrial team that is willing to share. We have tried several times to share a supplier base, a supplier requirement. You can see that in B2B events that have been happening in Mexico, when you have the companies that are willing to buy something, and you have all these, big numbers of things that they want to buy, and you have a bunch of suppliers. But really, the output of those events is not what, the numbers are not that good. And the reason why is because it is so complex to find a supplier that is going to be ready to meet all your expectations in terms of quality, certifications, and everything. It will be easier if you work together with another competition of yours to develop a supplier. And of course, if you start asking if they have a way to evaluate or audit existing suppliers in Mexico, and through the years we ended up by stop giving recommendations, and we actually build our own certified vendor program. That what we do is we help companies with a process to actually audit, understand the quality capabilities of existing suppliers in Mexico. So our clients, they don't have to find if they are going to work, if they are going to be reliable or not. They can easily go and ask us if we have options for whatever they're going to be buying here. And if he has passed the process of the certified vendor program, they can be sure that it's going to be a reliable source because it has already been tested. So something like that, you have to be more willing to share instead of keeping your own data and your own information only for you and trying to test on your own, because it can be a really long time and it can be sometimes painful. Well, first of all, you have to recognize that you are being part of, I would say, a trend in terms of market that is not only involving the US, Mexico, and the worldwide economy requires to build a real business case. And by a real business case, that it's assuming that you have to understand what are you good at and where you have some challenges or opportunities. Everybody will tell you about a success story, and everybody's going to tell you whatever that story went from them. if it was good or if it was bad. What is important right now is to understand that if you want to ask a supplier to move with you, or if you want actually to move yourself into a different country, a different location, trying to invest your time and effort to really build your own business case instead of building a full document with recommendations of a third party, recommendations of what some guy told you or some consultant told you, or whatever information you can find in a web search or something like that, is actually understand your own business case, work on a validation of that business case, and understand that the numbers are not just simple things that you can plug and play or modify according to your thinking. Numbers can actually have a significant impact on the success story that you can write on later on. Because it's not just about cost, it's understanding the tax implications that you're going to find when you go into a different country. You have to learn more about the culture that you're going to be facing, how to adapt your manufacturing operation in your relationship, with your expectations, mix that with a different culture, mix that with a different way to do business. The flexibility, the complexity of doing business in Mexico is not just different, it's just something that you have to learn. And if you don't go and perform a good analysis that is going to be including all of those different variables, even prior to doing something like building a commitment with someone, being that your potential supplier or customer, you have to really make sure that you're building a real business case and you can work on a validation of that business case. If you don't do something like that and you expect that things are going to be just working for you because probably your supplier will be joining you, because probably your supplier base is going to be there, or just because somebody else has already done it and they are doing well, doesn't necessarily have to be like that for you. So I think that the key here is, on our experiences, before to get into a commitment and before engaging with someone, make sure that you get some really good advice on how to build your business case. And the truth is that Mexico can be an option, but also you can find out that maybe your actual business case is not a good fit for Mexico, or Mexico is not a good fit for your business case. So I guess that on our experience, we have witnessed that. We have helped companies to do a successful startup in Mexico, but at the same time, we have been able to advise companies on what type of business case they will have to work on in order to be successful in Mexico.
While I was hearing Alejandro and some of the thoughts, some of the initial thoughts on this subject, I was assuming that every company would be in a constant process of rationalization and optimization of their supply chain, but maybe not. So probably the very first step would have to be an internal analysis of what are we doing as a company to look at our supply chain and see if we are being the most efficient that we can be, or if there are any risks, if there's anything that we should do. So it's more of that internal analysis. And then it doesn't matter whether that's related to migration of some of the supply chain from one country to another, but just what you have today. And it could be just your own supply chain within the United States. And again, go back to the word of sustainability. And so my supply chain is, okay, these suppliers that I have today that are serving me okay or well today, are they going to be able to have enough labor in the years to come to be able to sustain their operations, to service me the way they're serving me today? If I move or I make a move, would they be willing to make a move as well? What type of sources do they have further down the supply chain, and if that's something that they need to adjust, and then are they willing to adjust? So again, going back to the specific question, probably the initial step would be for every company to take a good look at where they are in their supply chain. Is there room for improvement? Can things be done in a better way? Can things could be run in a more efficient way, right? In that sense, linking it to what we have done in the past, certainly every project, and now we're talking about relocations, and within a relocation, there always has to be an analysis on the supply chain, okay? Because some of the reasons, some of the drivers that could bring in some efficiencies and some lower cost of operation can easily be offset by higher logistics cost because of keeping your current supply chain, because not changing your supply chain. So that's something that for us is a very important part of what we do as we help the clients in the analysis of their move, their expansion process, their relocation process, and how they should look at their supply chain, what things are not should not be moved probably at the beginning to make the transition easier, but what things will be very, very important to move and to make sure you find a different setup and a different or a rearrangement in your supply chain so you can really tap into all the benefits of the move or the relocation that you're making.